When I signed those legal documents in that sterile lawyer's office, watching my 3 adult children's faces drain of color, I finally understood what true power feels like. For 15 years, they had treated me like I was already dead. Now they would learn exactly what that meant. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I'm 72 years old, living alone in the same 3-bedroom colonial house in Oak Park, Illinois, where I raised 3 ungrateful children. The house where my late husband Robert and I built 47 years of memories before cancer took him 5 years ago. The house that echoes with emptiness every single day. You see, I used to believe that family was everything. I spent my entire adult life pouring love, time, and money into Michael, Sarah, and David. Michael, my eldest at 45, became a successful corporate lawyer downtown. Sarah, 42, built a thriving real estate business in the suburbs. David, my youngest at 38, works as an engineer for Boeing, all successful, all financially secure, all complete strangers to their own mother. After Robert died, something shifted. Maybe they thought their obligation died with him. Maybe they figured I'd just fade away quietly. The weekly Sunday dinners became monthly, then holidays only, then nothing but silence broken by occasional demands. Mom, can you watch Emma this weekend? Mom, I need to borrow $2,000 for the roof repair. Mom, can you help us move? Always taking, never giving, never just calling to ask how I was doing. I'd sit in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I packed their lunches for 20 years, where I helped with homework, where I celebrated every achievement and comforted every heartbreak. Now it felt like a museum of a life that no longer mattered. The grandchildren I rarely saw. The milestones I learned about through Facebook posts. Birthday cards I sent that were never acknowledged. But everything changed that Thanksgiving morning. I'd spent 3 days preparing the feast, just like I had for 40 years. The turkey was perfectly golden, the stuffing made from Robert's mother's recipe, the cranberry sauce from scratch. I set the table for 8 people with my good china, the same pattern we'd used since the children were small. 8 place settings for what I hoped would be the beginning of healing our broken family. The first text came at noon. Michael. Sorry, Mom. Important business dinner with potential clients. Rain check? A business dinner on Thanksgiving. Right. 20 minutes later, Sarah. Crisis with the Henderson property. Buyers threatening to pull out. Can't leave the office. So sorry. On Thanksgiving Day. Of course. Then David, the final blow. Exhausted from overtime this week. Need to recharge. Maybe Christmas? Maybe Christmas. Maybe. I sat at that perfectly set table, staring at 8 empty chairs, the silence broken only by the grandfather clock Robert had given me for our anniversary. Tick, tock, tick, tock, counting down the seconds of my irrelevant life. The turkey grew cold, the candles burned down to stubs, and something inside me finally broke, but instead of crying, I started laughing. A deep, liberating laugh that echoed through the empty house, because in that moment of complete abandonment, I realized something powerful. I wasn't powerless. I was just playing by the wrong rules. What do you think I should have done? Should I have kept trying to win their love? Let me know in the comments what you would do in my situation. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story gets much more intense. The next morning, I made the first change. I stopped calling them. Completely. No more just checking in calls that went straight to voicemail. No more birthday cards that disappeared into their busy lives. No more emergency babysitting when their carefully planned lives fell apart. No more being their emotional and financial safety net while receiving nothing in return. I also started making subtle changes in my routine. Instead of staying home waiting for calls that never came, I began going out. I joined the book club at the library. I started taking watercolor classes at the community center I volunteered at the food bank, where I met other women my age, who actually appreciated my presence. For the first time in 5 years, I was living instead of just existing. But more importantly, I started dropping hints to my neighbors and friends. "I've been thinking a lot about the future lately," I'd mention casually to Mrs. Chen next door while watering my roses. "At my age, you realize how important it is to make sure your affairs are in order," I'd tell the ladies at book club. "I want my legacy to really matter to people who need it," I'd say at the grocery store to acquaintances from church. Word travels fast in suburban neighborhoods, especially when it concerns elderly widows making important decisions. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was creating ripples that would eventually reach my children's ears, and I was meeting with people who could help me design the perfect test. The lawyer, James Morrison, was recommended by my friend Helen, whose daughter had used his services for estate planning. When I explained what I wanted to do, he raised his eyebrows, but agreed to help. "It's unconventional," he said, "but perfectly legal, as long as we're clear about the boundaries." We spent weeks crafting the perfect scenario. 6 months of silence passed like a peaceful dream. No demanding children interrupting my days. No guilt trips about being a bad grandmother. No last-minute requests that disrupted my plans. I was rediscovering who Margaret was beyond being a mother and provider. Then came the morning that changed everything. I was in my garden, tending to the roses Robert had planted for our anniversary 20 years ago, when I missed a step on the small decorative stones bordering the flower bed. I went down hard, twisting my ankle and scraping my palm on the rough concrete. It wasn't serious, but it hurt, and I couldn't put weight on my foot. The old me would have immediately called one of my children for help. The new me called Mrs. Chen. "Don't make a fuss," I told her, "just help me get to urgent care." She drove me there, waited while they x-rayed my ankle, and helped me home with the walking boot and crutches. A sprained ankle, nothing more. But Mrs. Chen, bless her heart, was worried about me living alone with limited mobility. She mentioned my fall to her daughter. Her daughter told her coworker. Her coworker's husband played golf with Michael. By the end of the week, the neighborhood gossip network had delivered the news to all 3 of my children. Michael arrived first, bursting through my front door like a conquering hero. "Mom, why didn't you call me? I'm your son." He looked around the house with the sharp eyes of a lawyer, noting my independence, my ability to manage, despite the walking boot. "You could have been seriously hurt. We need to talk about your living situation." Sarah came the next day with Emma, my 10-year-old granddaughter whom I'd seen maybe 4 times this year. "Mom, we heard about your accident. Emma wanted to see Grandma." Emma hugged me tightly, and for a moment, my heart softened, until I heard Sarah whispering into her phone in the kitchen. "She's more fragile than she lets on. We might need to consider our options." David showed up that weekend with his wife Jennifer and their twin boys. "Mom, you scared us," he said, though his eyes were calculating the condition of the house, the upkeep, the value. Jennifer walked through the rooms like she was already redecorating, but their concern had a strange focus. Instead of asking how I was feeling emotionally, they wanted to know about my support system. Instead of offering to spend time with me, they wanted to discuss practical matters. Michael kept steering conversations toward my finances. "Are you managing okay, Mom? Do you need help organizing your accounts?" Sarah asked about the house maintenance. "This place is getting too big for you, don't you think?" David inquired about my will. "Is everything up to date legally? Dad's death changed a lot of things." I played my role perfectly. I acted a little more confused than usual, a little more helpless. I mentioned being overwhelmed by all the paperwork and not sure I understand all these financial things. I watched their eyes light up with opportunistic concern. They started visiting more regularly, but their conversations always circled back to the same themes. my declining abilities, my inability to properly maintain the house, my need for professional guidance with my affairs. They whispered in corners, made phone calls in private, and treated me like I was developing dementia. One evening, I pretended to be asleep on the living room sofa while they thought they were speaking quietly in the kitchen. She's worth at least $1.2 million with the house, investments, and Dad's life insurance, Michael said with the precision of someone who'd done his research. The house alone is worth $800,000 in this market, Sarah added. We need to make sure she doesn't make any impulsive decisions, David concluded. There it was. The truth I'd suspected but never wanted to believe. Their sudden concern wasn't about my well-being. It was about protecting their inheritance from their confused, declining mother. Are you starting to see the real picture here? These weren't concerned children checking on their aging mother. These were vultures circling their prey. But here's what they didn't know. This old bird still had some fight left. Stay tuned because you won't believe what I did next. The meeting I called for the following Tuesday was simple. I need help with some important legal matters. I told each of them separately. I've been thinking about my future, and I want all three of you there when I make these decisions. They agreed immediately, probably thinking they were finally getting control of the situation. James Morrison's law office was exactly what I'd requested. Imposing, formal, intimidating. Dark wood paneling, legal books lining the walls, the smell of leather and power. When my children arrived, they were nervous but excited, like children on Christmas morning waiting to see what presents awaited them. I was already seated at the large conference table when they walked in, wearing my best navy dress and pearls, looking every inch the composed widow making important decisions about her estate. James sat at the head of the table with several official-looking documents spread before him. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steady and clear. I know we've all been concerned about my future security, especially after my fall. I've done a lot of thinking, and I've made some important decisions about my estate. Michael leaned forward, his lawyer instincts engaged. Sarah pulled out her phone to take notes. David folded his hands, trying to look respectful, while practically vibrating with anticipation. As you know, I continued, your father and I worked very hard to build financial security. The house, the investments, the savings. It represents a lifetime of careful planning. Originally, I planned to leave everything to the three of you equally. The word originally hung in the air like a sword. I saw the first flicker of concern cross their faces. However, recent events have made me reconsider what kind of legacy I want to leave. I've realized that you're all successful adults with your own careers and financial stability. You don't need my money to survive. Now they were definitely worried. Sarah's phone trembled slightly in her hands. Michael's jaw tightened. David's face had gone pale. So I've decided to donate my entire estate to charity. The words dropped like bombs in the silent room. The house will go to Habitat for Humanity to help families who actually need homes. My investments will be split between the Alzheimer's Association and the Children's Education Fund. My savings will support the local food bank where I volunteer. The explosion was immediate and ugly. Michael shot to his feet, his professional composure shattered. You can't be serious. This is our inheritance. Dad worked his whole life for this. Sarah started crying, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage and panic. Mom, you're not thinking clearly. You're being manipulated. We're your children. We deserve this money. David's engineer mind went straight to problem-solving mode. This isn't legal. She's clearly not mentally competent to make these decisions. We need to contest this immediately. But I wasn't finished. Mr. Morrison, I said calmly, please show them the documents I'm prepared to sign today. James slid the papers across the table with theatrical precision as my children frantically scanned the legal language. I watched their faces transform into masks of greed and desperation I'd never seen before. This wasn't grief over losing their mother's legacy. This was fury over losing money they'd already spent in their minds. "You can't do this to us," Sarah screamed, abandoning all pretense of loving concern. "We have mortgage payments, college funds. We were counting on this money." "Counting on my death, you mean?" I asked quietly. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on James's desk. My children stared at me like I was a stranger. In many ways, I suppose I was. They'd never seen the Margaret who wouldn't be manipulated, who wouldn't be taken for granted, who wouldn't quietly fade away for their convenience. Michael recovered first, switching into lawyer mode. "Mom, I understand you're upset about something, but this is an extreme reaction to whatever we've done wrong. Let's talk about this rationally. What do you want from us?" There it was, the negotiation, the assumption that I was using their inheritance as leverage to get attention. Even now, they didn't understand that their behavior had consequences beyond their control. "What I want," I said, standing up slowly, "is for you to understand exactly who you've become. For 5 years, you've treated me like I was already dead. You've ignored me unless you needed something. You've excluded me from your lives while expecting me to be available for yours. You've shown more interest in my financial statements than in my emotional well-being." The truth hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been smoldering for years. But then I revealed the final twist that would change everything forever. "However," I continued, reaching into my purse and pulling out a small recording device, "these papers aren't real." The silence was deafening. James Morrison smiled slightly. He'd played his role perfectly. This entire scenario was a test, a way to reveal your true priorities and feelings about your aging mother. The documents are fake, created with Mr. Morrison's help to see exactly how you would react when you thought your inheritance was threatened. Michael's face went from pale to deep red. You set us up?" "I gave you an opportunity to show me who you really are," I corrected. "And you did. Magnificently." Sarah was staring at the recording device in my hand. "You recorded us?" "Every word. Your immediate concern wasn't about losing your mother's companionship or guidance. It wasn't about preserving family memories or honoring your father's wishes. It was about money. Pure and simple." David found his voice. "This is entrapment. This isn't fair." "Neither is abandoning your mother for 5 years and then suddenly caring about her welfare when you think she might give away your inheritance." The room filled with uncomfortable shifting and guilty glances. For the first time in years, I had their complete attention. "But here's what's going to happen now," I said, settling back into my chair with the confidence of someone who finally held all the cards. "You have a choice. We can start over. You can begin treating me like a human being whose value isn't measured by what I can provide for you. You can include me in your lives because you want to, not because you need something. You can let your children know their grandmother as a person, not just as a source of birthday money and emergency babysitting." I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Or I can make those fake documents real. I can actually donate everything to charity and spend my remaining years surrounded by people who appreciate my presence instead of calculating my net worth." The choice was theirs, but the power was finally mine. Michael was the first to break. "Mom, we didn't realize—" He stopped because we all knew that wasn't true. They had realized. They just hadn't cared. Sarah's tears had stopped, replaced by something that might have been shame. "We got so busy with our own lives. We forgot." "You forgot I was a person," I finished for her. "You forgot I had feelings and needs beyond being useful to you." David, always the engineer, tried to find the logical solution. "What do you want us to do? How do we fix this?" It was the first time in 5 years any of them had asked what I wanted. "I want relationships, Not obligations, I said simply. I want phone calls that aren't requests for favors. I want to be included in holidays because you enjoy my company, not because you feel guilty. I want my grandchildren to know me as more than the woman who gives them money for birthdays. I want to matter to you while I'm alive, not just when I'm dead. The silence stretched between us, filled with years of neglect and hurt, but also with the possibility of something different. And I want honesty, I added. If you're struggling financially, tell me. If you need help, ask for it openly instead of manipulating me into providing it. If you're too busy to visit, say so instead of making excuses. I'd rather have an honest relationship than a performance. James Morrison quietly gathered the fake documents, his work done. My children sat in stunned silence, processing the reality that their mother wasn't the helpless, confused woman they'd assumed her to be. Michael spoke first, and for the first time in years, his voice held genuine emotion instead of calculation. Mom, I owe you an apology, a real one. We treated you terribly, and we justified it by telling ourselves you were fine, that you didn't need us because you're so independent. Independence and not needing people are two different things, I replied. I can take care of myself physically, but that doesn't mean I don't need emotional connection with my children. Sarah reached across the table and touched my hand tentatively. I was so focused on building my business, I forgot that success means nothing if you lose your family in the process. David nodded slowly. We took you for granted. We assumed you'd always be there when we needed you, but we never considered that you might need us too. The conversation that followed wasn't easy. We talked about specific incidents, specific hurts, specific disappointments. We discussed their father's death and how it had changed all of our perspectives on family. We acknowledged that they had their own struggles and pressures, but that those struggles didn't excuse abandoning their mother. Most importantly, we established new boundaries and expectations. Regular family dinners, where everyone put away their phones. Holiday celebrations that included me from the planning stage, not just as the host. Grandparent time that wasn't just emergency babysitting. Financial conversations that were honest and respectful rather than manipulative. The transformation didn't happen overnight. There were setbacks and misunderstandings. Sarah struggled with including me in her business stress instead of just calling when she needed help with the children. Michael had to learn to have conversations that weren't about solving problems or managing situations. David needed to understand that I wanted to hear about his life, not just be updated on major events through secondhand information. But slowly, genuinely, our relationships began to heal. The grandchildren started coming over for cooking lessons and story time, not just when their parents needed a babysitter. My children began calling just to chat, sharing their daily frustrations and victories. Holiday preparations became family activities instead of my solo performances. 6 months after that confrontation in the lawyer's office, we had our first real Thanksgiving in 5 years. Not the perfectly formal dinner I used to create in desperate hope of connection, but a chaotic, collaborative celebration where everyone contributed something. Michael brought wine and helped carve the turkey. Sarah made her grandmother's sweet potato casserole and shared stories about difficult clients. David arrived early to help set up tables for all the grandchildren and stayed late to help clean up. The house that had echoed with loneliness was filled with laughter, arguments about football games, children's voices, and the comfortable noise of a family that actually wanted to be together. As I watched my son teach my grandson how to make proper gravy, my daughter explaining real estate contracts to her teenage daughter, and my youngest son playing board games with the twins, I realized something profound. I had gotten my family back, not through manipulation or guilt, but by refusing to accept being taken for granted. The recording device still sits in my jewelry box, a reminder of the day I chose to fight for my dignity instead of quietly accepting neglect. I never had to use those fake donation papers because my children chose love over greed when they finally understood the stakes. But most importantly, I learned that being a mother doesn't mean accepting whatever scraps of attention your children decide to give you. It doesn't mean being grateful for bare minimum effort or pretending that financial security replaces emotional connection. Being a mother means teaching your children how to treat you with respect, even if that lesson comes later than you'd hoped. Today, my children call me regularly, not because they need something, but because they want to share their lives with me. They include me in planning family events, ask for my advice on important decisions, and make sure I'm part of their children's lives in meaningful ways. When they do need help, financial or otherwise, they ask honestly and respectfully, and they show genuine gratitude. The inheritance they were so worried about losing, it's still intact, still planned to be divided among them equally. But now they know that their father's legacy and my love aren't things they can take for granted. They're gifts that must be honored through how we treat each other while we're all still here to enjoy them. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for your children is to stop enabling their worst behaviors and start demanding their best selves. Sometimes, you have to be willing to lose what you thought you had in order to build what you actually need. My advice to any parent feeling invisible in their adult children's lives: you have more power than you realize. Don't waste your remaining years begging for crumbs of attention from people who should be grateful for your presence in their lives. Demand better. Expect better. And be willing to walk away if they can't rise to meet your reasonable expectations. Family isn't just about blood relations or inheritance rights. It's about mutual respect, genuine care, and choosing to prioritize each other's well-being. It took a fake legal document and a lot of courage, but I finally have the family I always wanted. One based on love instead of obligation, connection instead of convenience. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever felt taken for granted by your family? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about family, relationships, and finding your strength when people underestimate you. Sometimes the quietest person in the room has the most powerful voice of all. YouTube description: a 72-year-old widow's shocking plan to test her 3 successful children who ignored her for years until they thought their inheritance was at risk. When Margaret signed legal papers in a lawyer's office, her children's true priorities were finally exposed. This emotional story reveals what happened when a mother refused to be taken for granted and demanded the respect she deserved. A tale of family dynamics, inheritance drama, and the power of standing up for yourself that will make you rethink how you treat your aging parents. The ending will surprise you and might just change your perspective on family relationships forever. Family drama inheritance story, parent-child relationships.